Good afternoon. My name is Dan Wright, and I'm your host for TechDiver Chronicles 4. Today, our guest is Nuno Gomes, two-time Guinness Book of World Record holder for deep dives both in the ocean and in caves. Good afternoon, Nuno. Thank you for being here. Would you give us a brief history of your diving?
I started diving really because I had to do a salvage. So my father-in-law had a yacht in a reservoir. It was about 100 feet deep. And so I started taking lessons in diving, and I did some pool training. And then I bought myself a twin set, a twin hose, and went searching for the outboard motor that had fallen overboard at 100 feet, solo, on a tendered rope, and the vis was null. There was absolutely no visibility. Eventually, after a day or two, I found the motor, tied the rope to it, came up, and that was my first dive. After that, diving was relatively easy.
What was your inspiration or drive to start going deep diving?
I didn't really have an inspiration to do deep diving. It was a progressive sort of depth increase. So my first real open water dive, which was in the cave, was to about 190 feet. And that was the first official training dive that I did. And I loved it. It was really nice. The water was clear, even though it was really dark. And there was always the challenge to get to the deepest point of a cave or lake or to a wreck. And so after having done that dive successfully to 190 feet, I continued diving deeper and deeper into that cave, which went, at that stage with a high water level, it went down to about 240 feet. And then I mapped that cave. And in fact, I went on to write a paper about stromatolites that I found in that cave. Stromatolites were never thought to exist in fresh water. And I found it and I wrote a paper. Even before I graduated with my first degree, I wrote that paper. And it was well received all over the world, like Max Planck Institute loved it. All the scientific magazines loved it and they wanted a copy of it. So at the one stage, I came to the realization that deep air diving, and I was used to it. I was doing dives to 300 feet, 330 feet on air constantly. I realized, look, if I want to go a little bit deeper, I'm going to have to go onto mixed gas. So I got hold of a US Navy manual. I looked at the tables and I realized, look, this is going to be a little bit difficult because the US Navy asks you to leave the water at 40 feet, go up to the surface and into a recompression chamber. And so, in other words, you do the last bit of the decompression in a recompression chamber. And so this doesn't work so well. So I devised my own method of calculating decompression for mixed gas. I combined and calculated a method using air tables and mixed gas tables. And it worked. It worked really well. And I went and did dives over 500 feet using those tables that I had devised. And and so that gave me opportunity to go deeper and deeper. And eventually, I met up with Shaq Exley at Boesmansgat, and he had a decompression program. It was called Dr. X. And that allowed you to dive down to 1,000 feet. But the problem with it was that it didn't incorporate any altitude correction. So once you got to 1,000 feet, taking into account altitude correction, it would stop. It wouldn't let you go deeper. So me and some friends at the university rewrote a program for calculating decompression thickness based on the Buhlmann model. And that worked very well. And we went on to go deeper and deeper. And every time you go deeper, then you think, well, I'm not at the end yet, so let's try and go a little bit deeper. So I was not really motivated to go deeper, but it just happened that I was going deeper because I said, okay, I went down to 600 feet. Let's see if I can get down to 700 feet. And every time I went deeper and deeper and deeper. But that was in caves. In the sea, it was a different story because you get currents, the weather changes, and it takes a lot more planning. So I started diving deep in wrecks in around South Africa, all over the place. And it was nice. I started liking that, and I collected a lot of portholes and all types of stuff.
At Bushman's Hole, what was your max depth, your total run time, and your mix?
The depth that was approved by Guinness World Records was 927 feet. That depth is conservative. And the actual depth is at least 10 to 15 feet more. But, you know, when you submit a record, at least at that time, they didn't consider any rope stretch or anything like that, which they do now. So the claimed depth was 927 feet. The difference here is that there's an altitude of 5,500 feet, so you have to correct. When you correct, you arrive at a depth of about 1,100 feet or thereabouts. So it is a long dive. It's like at least 12 hours. I think the total dive time was about 12 hours, 20 minutes. It takes you about 15 minutes to get there. I spent about 2 or 3 minutes at the bottom, and the rest of the time I was decompressing. The mixture that I used was 5.25 oxygen and 75% helium. The rest, which is about 19 to 20%, was nitrogen. It was a long dive. It went very well. I would say it went very well, although towards the end, I was getting quite cold. I didn't get any decompression sickness, so I couldn't really complain. I expected to, in fact, have gone deeper because I used the sonar and the depths that I got with the sonar were deeper than about than the 927 feet. But sonars are not always accurate, and so in the end, that's what happened. We went for that depth, and that would remain the official depth of 927 feet. There was quite a lot of narcosis at the bottom, but I was fairly used to dealing with narcosis, and so it wasn't anything that was out of the ordinary for me. So I was easily able to cope with the narcosis that I had. So yeah, it was probably one of the more successful dives and uneventful dives that I had.
Describe your close call at Bushman's.
So I was monitoring my gauge, my computer, and the bottom appeared sooner than I expected. My lights, which were these Pelican Sabre lights, were not that powerful. You could maybe see about 30 feet or so with them. They were great for depth because they were very strong and resistant to depth. But they didn't give you the distance that you can get with newer lights. So by the time I saw the bottom coming up, I was getting quite close to it. So, and I could see a little bit further along that there was a ledge. And I wanted to get past that ledge because it meant at least another 10 feet of depth. So I swam, and while I was swimming towards that deeper point where it became flat, I was trying to inflate my BC, hold the rope, swim, and get to that deeper point. So I wasn't able to inflate my buoyancy compensators enough. And what happened is I crash landed into the mud and silt, which was really thick there. It was at least 10 feet deep, I would say. But I couldn't, so I went and got stuck in that, on all fours on that silt. And as that happened, a huge cloud of silt went up. Now, I was in absolute darkness, just holding the rope and trying to inflate my buoyancy compensators. Eventually, I tried to get unstuck by swimming out of it, but I was just too heavy, and there was some sort of a suction in the mud and silt that wouldn't let me get out. So I kept on inflating the buoyancy compensators. Eventually, I came unstuck, and I started ascending at a hell of a rate. But all the time I managed to hold on to the rope. But it was like about 50 feet of ascent before I got out of that cloud of silt. And then I realized, really, I'm moving far too fast. Then I had to dump the air out of the buoyancy compensators and stop. And fortunately, I was able to slow down enough to not overshoot my about 500-foot deco stop. where I had a tank waiting for me to decompress from. So, but fortunately, I managed to do it, and from there on, everything went well. But it was, I would say, a fairly close call, especially if I lost a rope. If I lost the rope, I was done.
Who holds the Guinness World Record for deep diving on open circuit?
The Guinness World Record has recognized Ahmed Gabr as the holder of the deepest dive. Basically, the Guinness record book doesn't recognize differently from cave or sea dives. They only say deepest dive, flat. So he's got the Guinness World Record at 332.5 meters. I'm not exactly sure how much that is in feet. We can calculate that. But the thing is, basically it means that I'm the second deepest diver with 318.25 without rope stretch, which really, the dive was in fact about 321.25 meters, which is about 1,050 feet. Over the years, I received emails from guys in Egypt, divers, and other people saying, you're still the record holder. But I thought, they're just trying to be kind to me. It's not really true, and this and that. And one day, I received a message from one of Ahmed Gabr's support divers saying that that dive was fake. He hadn't really done it. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. But I still I wasn't convinced. I kept on getting more emails from other team members telling me the same. So I decided to contact Michael Menduno. He's a guru, and really he knows all about technical diving. And he investigated it further. And he agreed. He went on to interview a whole lot of support divers in Gabr's team, and they all said the same. So Michael Menduno wrote to Guinness World Records and said, there's something wrong here. You have to rectify this. If he really did the dive or not, we don't know. But there seems to be a lot of evidence pointing otherwise. But the key point is that he was using a bottom timer that says 330 meter, which is 1,000 feet, bottom timer. But there's no difference between that diver, that gauge, that reads in feet and the one that reads in meters. So when you get a depth, it doesn't tell you if it's feet or meters. So it was determined that he was in fact using a feet gauge and claiming it to be meters. But that's only just part of the story. There's a lot more to it. But sooner or later, everybody will know what really happened.
Who's done the most dives to 825 feet?
I was the only diver to have done 4 dives below 825 feet. So 2 of the dives I did in the cave, and 2 of the dives I did in the sea. More recently, some of the other divers have caught up. Another two divers, in fact. So we got Chris Tarnowski, who's quite a guru cave diver. So he did two in caves, one in the lake, and the other one he did in the sea, in the Red Sea. So he was the first to equal my first, doing 4 dives deeper than 825 feet. Very recently, Xavier Meniscus from France also equaled. But all his dives are done in caves. So he's got it. Currently, he's got the deepest dive in a cave at 312 meters. My dives are all on open circuit, and both Chris Tarnowski's and Xavier's Meniscus did it with rebreathers.
What is the success rate for a dive to 1,000 feet or more?
The success rate for world record dives varies quite a lot. If you take divers that have been below 825 feet, the chances of survival are about a 50-50. So we're saying those that are quite experienced in dives below 825 feet have a 50-50 chance. Divers that try and beat the world record and have not dived below 825 feet, they've got a small chance, like 0 maybe to 25 chance of survival at best. But the thing is, deep diving is deep diving. Like for me, every dive is dangerous. 100-foot dive is deep. Let's face it, it's deep. It's a 10-story building. You can paint it whichever color you like. It's deep. There's no two ways about it.
Why do divers die during these world record attempts?
I think the most important factor is physical fitness. And then the other aspect of it is mental fitness. How do you get mental fitness? By going deeper and deeper, very progressively. In other words, small increments. We're talking probably about 30, 40-foot increments. So you keep on going a little bit deeper, and you find out what went wrong in this dive. After each dive, you have to analyze it carefully and determine what went wrong. And then you have to fix it before you try and go a little bit deeper. But typically, from my experience, the most critical point is you have to be in excellent physical shape. The second point is you need to test the equipment. The equipment fails all the time. Every piece of equipment can and does fail. I mean, I don't think there's any piece of equipment that hasn't failed on me. Buoyancy compensator has failed on me. Dry suit has failed on me. Regulators have failed on me. Computers have failed. You name it, they all fail. And so you need to progressively test it, but there's always the chance that something else will fail that you didn't foresee, So, for instance, I had one dive where I had tested this regulator to 660 feet. It was a new regulator. It worked perfectly. Next time around, it failed at 890 feet. See, the other thing is the environment. Will the environment remain stable for the long period of time that you need? I mean, you can go to sea and the sea is calm in the morning when you start the dive, but 12 hours later the sea could be very rough. On one of my record attempts, the boat captain wanted to leave me decompressing miles out in the sea by myself, because in the afternoon the sea became very rough and the waves were washing right over the boat. And we're talking about a big boat. And the captain said, I'm going back to shore because it's too dangerous for my boat. And the team members managed to persuade him to stay out at sea and be in the near vicinity of where I was decompressing. I was decompressing on a floating shot line. So this old system moved with the sea. So even though there were big waves and the deco line was going up and down, it was relatively stable. It's difficult to determine all the possibilities. The other problem is decompression. Gases are you going to use? Are you going to use what bottom gas? What is acceptable for you may not work for somebody else. What deco gases are you going to use? Are you going to prevent isobaric counter-diffusion or inner-ear decompression sickness? If you get it, how are you going to cope with it? Divers have died because this happened to them during their decompression. Others, more experienced ones like Xavier Meniscus, have managed to survive. So it's something that one has to consider.
Why are almost all record dives a solo dive?
Most of the record dives are solo. At least 95% of them are solo. I only know of one record attempt that was done where two divers were doing it concurrently next to each other. That was when Jim Bowden and Shaq Exley went for the world record. They were a couple of feet apart on separate lines, going down, trying to get down to 1,000 feet. Shaq Exley, the more experienced diver, didn't make it, and Jim Bowden, the less experienced diver, although he was also quite experienced, he died at, nobody really knows at what depth Shaq Exley died, but it was somewhere in the region of 900 feet. Jim Bowden went on to 925 feet. Now, all the other divers dive solo, and the reason why I prefer to dive solo is because the logistics, for a start, are less complex. If you've got two divers that have problems, the support team will have a really hard time helping two divers. And also that is exactly what happened when Don Shirley and Dave Shaw did a very deep dive at Boesmansgat. So Dave Shaw died at the depth of 860 feet, and Don Shirley survived. So when Don Shirley had a lot of problems during decompression. He got isobaric counter-diffusion, and the team helped him, and they managed to recover him, and he survived the dive. Imagine if Dave Shaw also had the same problems. The team would have not been able to help both of them at the same time. The other reason is when you're doing these dives, the buddy team, a theory doesn't work really well, because if you have a problem at 800 or 900 feet, you cannot really buddy breathe with your buddy and sort of save your buddy. You may be able to do something small, but generally speaking, you are so busy trying to survive yourself that helping someone else is just really not practical. So it's safer, in fact, to dive solo. And you can concentrate on your own dive and not be worried, where's my buddy? Is he okay? Is he not okay? Because you're not going to be able to save him. And also, you could also kill yourself because you're not concentrating on your own dive. So it's preferable, in my mind, to do a solo dive instead of a buddy team dive.
Clipped. Have you ever been bent?
I have been bent. I did a dive at Boesmansgat to about 825, 830 feet. And when I surfaced, although I felt perfect, this was about a 10-hour dive, I felt absolutely perfect and strong. But I was totally deaf. So I didn't know what was going on. Usually, when you are bent, you can feel pain, or you immobilized, you vomit, and you lose your balance, or something like that. I had no idea what was wrong, why I was completely deaf, and I mean 100% deaf. So I grabbed hold of Professor Buhlmann's book on decompression sickness, and I sat reading it to try and find out if I could figure out what was wrong with me. So after reading it, I discovered that I had in a year decompression sickness, or isobaric counter-diffusion. Here's the thing. Usually it manifests itself in terms of losing your balance, not being totally deaf, but it can also manifest itself in terms of losing your balance and being deaf. So my balance was perfect, but I was completely deaf. So I arrived at the doctor, Dr. Frans Cronier, and he said, okay, let's go. We quickly go to the chamber. So we went to the chamber. He gave me a whole lot of drugs and injections, corticosteroids and vitamin C and aspirin and all kinds of stuff. And I went into the chamber and I did a 4-hour oxygen treatment. And I kept on doing that for a whole week. Every day I did a chamber treatment. After 1 week, I had recovered about 25% of my hearing. I was still quite deaf. But I had recovered a little bit. And then after 1 week he said, look, it doesn't help to do any more chamber treatments. Hopefully you'll recover on your own. And after about 3 months, I had recovered virtually all my hearing, like about 95%. One of my ears recovered fully, and the other one had recovered to about 95%. Today, I'm fine, and I think there are a lot of people that are a lot deafer than I am. So I was fortunate. But it was a life-changing episode. I realized, wow, if I don't recover, I'm just going to be deaf. How am I going to work? It's going to be a problem. But I was fortunate.
How many times have you come close to dying?
I've come close to dying quite a few times. The first time was when I was spearfishing. I was not even scuba diving. I was spearfishing. I used to spearfish competitively, at provincial level, national level. And typically, a free dive for spearfishing would be close to 100 foot deep. It would last probably close to 3 minutes. And you'd be doing this kind of thing for like about 6 hours, the whole day, to see how many fish you can shoot. The one dive that I made was next to a rock, and there were waves crashing over it. And so when the waves crash over the rock, it's easy to go down next to the rock. So I went down, and I saw a fish, then it moved, then it came back, and eventually I shot the fish, but I was really at the limit. I was already on about 3 minutes breath hold. And I started coming up, and it was fine, no problem. When I got to about 20 feet from the surface, a huge wave came and pushed me way back down to 100 feet. But I had no more air. My air was already finished long time ago. For some reason, I was fortunate to be able to wait until it came back, and the current pushed me back up. And I just survived. It took me like about 10 minutes to recover from that dive. And that was the first time. The second time, I already spoke about it. It was the time at Boesmansgat, where I came quite close to dying because I was stuck in the mud. So I'll step forward to the third time. The third time was in the sea. I was trying to do a world record dive, and my regulator stopped working at close to 900 feet. It just stopped. It didn't give me any air. So I had no option but to start ascending and change the regulator to the bailout bottle. So I took the regulator on the bailout bottle, and I thought of expecting that it wouldn't work also. But fortunately it worked. And I started ascending with the bailout bottle, but the bailout bottle wouldn't last very long. So the idea was to get to my first stage decompression bottle which I just managed to do while holding my breath for some time when I came close to it. But that wasn't all that was going to happen. When I got to that stage bottle, I used it for a couple of minutes, and then some more because I had ascended far too fast. Then I was going to move that stage bottle up to the next decompression stop, but I couldn't unlock the carabiner. Somebody had tightened it so hard that it was impossible. So eventually I started ascending. I had to hold my breath again until the next stage bottle. And then from there on, I was able to move the stage bottles up one at a time. Eventually, I got to 200 foot. This was my first air deco stop. There was supposed to be a support diver at that depth that would bring me a tank to breathe from. But the support diver didn't arrive. Fortunately, on the way down, I had taken a small deco tank with air, which was just intended to be sufficient for going down to about 200 foot. But there was a little bit of air in it still. It was a smaller tank. So the deco stop at 200 foot was quite a long stop. I think something like 45 minutes. And I only had, so I realized, well, the support diver is not arriving. I have to make this tank last 45 minutes at 200 foot. So I would take a breath, hold my breath for as long as I could, then exhale, and eventually, close to 45 minutes, this tank was virtually empty. And then the support diver arrived with the tank. But by then I'd already completed all the deco, but it was close, very close. And from there onwards, everything went fine. And I was able to decompress. I didn't get bent, I don't know how. The other time, it was at Boesmansgat. The one diver diving with somebody else died. I was decompressing. I was decompressing at about 30 foot. And I saw this buddy team come past me, and I could clearly see the other diver is dead. He's just bringing him up. So I thought, wow, I don't know, I've got to do something about this. So I skipped all my decompression from 30 foot up. And I came up with them, and we tried to resuscitate this diver. But he didn't recover, unfortunately. But I was lucky I didn't get bent. I don't know how I didn't get bent, because I missed so much decompression.
On your record dives, what has been your mix for the bottom?
So my mix for the bottom was 5.25 oxygen and 75% helium. That is the record at Boesmansgat. The total dive time was about 12 hours, 15 minutes. The bottom time was supposed to be around 14 minutes, but it went longer. I think it ended up being like about 17 minutes. And that is the record dive at Boesmansgat. The record dive in the sea was a little bit different. So we had 3.15 oxygen and 85% of helium. So the bottom time was also around the 15-minute mark, and the decompression time was around 12 hours and 20 minutes, so it was a bit longer. And both of these dives at the narcosis level which was acceptable to me. The Boesmansgat record dive had definitely a higher narcosis level. The END for the Boesmansgat dive was close to 70 meters or 230 feet, whilst the END for the sea dive was around 130 feet, which was really quite manageable. The biggest problem is high pressure nervous syndrome. So the one thing that I say about narcosis is a very misleading name. I think one has to consider some different naming of narcosis. Maybe diver impairment factor, because it's not really narcosis as such. It's a combination of factors. Your ability to do things is greatly diminished, really, in terms of your mental and your motor functions. So it's not really narcosis, it's a total combination of what you're able to do and what you're able not to do mentally and from a functional point of view.
I'll start again. Have you ever recovered a body of a diver?
My first body recovery attempt was at Boesmansgat, trying to recover the body of Andrea. So that was a very, very long process. The team went to Boesmansgat numerous times, and the search first started on the roof, which was the obvious place. So we searched the roof completely. The last that he was seen was he was sinking. And we thought maybe he managed to inflate his BC, and since the ROV hadn't found him at the bottom, he was somewhere on the roof. So we searched the roof completely, and at the same time we took sonar readings from the roof down to the bottom of the cave to try and find the deepest point. Then we started circling around, looking on the walls that he might be stuck somewhere on one of the walls, and went deeper and deeper and deeper until we reached about 500 feet, looking on the walls, and still nothing. Theo van Heerden, a police diver, by the way, he recovered at least the bodies of about 300 dead people. He contacted me and they said, look, can you go to the bottom and look for the body of Andrea? He said the ROV had been there, they hadn't found anything. So I thought long and hard about it. And I said, okay, look, let's give it a go. So I went to the deepest point that we determined with a sonar. Still didn't find the body. later on, Dave Shaw would find the body at 886 feet. That's about 270 meters. And then later he would come back to try and recover the body, but he would also die. On the other hand, one day I was diving at Boesmansgat, a cave in South Africa, and I just finished doing about a 200 to 220 foot cave dive, and I was busy packing when somebody came and called me and said, "One of our divers is missing. We don't know where he is. He was seen going into this cave, going to about 200 foot, and he hasn't come back." So I said, "Okay, I can have a look, but I cannot go now. I have to first fill up my tanks." And so me and my buddy, Malcolm Keeping, filled up our tanks and went back in to the bottom and then into the cave to search for the diver. And we found him right at the end, at the depth of over 200 foot. He was stuck in a crevice on the roof of the cave. So we dislodged him, and he had no mask. He must have ripped it off sometime during his dive. Yeah, so it was quite a process bringing him out there. And eventually we managed to get him out. But our biggest problem was, what decompression do we do? At that time, we were mostly using the US Navy tables. But the US Navy tables didn't allow for repetitive dives below that depth. So we didn't know what to do. So what we had done is, in fact, just added the two bottom times together and decompressed as though it had been one single dive, the previous dive and this dive that we did. We decompressed for a very long time, but eventually we surfaced with the body, and that was an unpleasant dive.
Have you saved any divers from certain death?
The one time we were diving in a wreck in the Cape, and we went right inside the wreck. And when we came out the other side of the wreck, we would go in one side and come out the other side, navigating through the doors. And when I came out the other side, I asked the buddy that was with me, where's the other diver? Nobody knew. So we went in, back inside the wreck, tried to retrace our steps back, and we found that the diver, SPG, became stuck on the door and moved up to the hinge. But the diver that was stuck there couldn't see it, because couldn't turn around to see it. So that diver was properly stuck. There was no ways that diver could become unstuck by himself. So we saw what the problem was. There was a huge cloud of silt around the diver. We managed to pull the SPG down and out and brought the diver out, and that was close, very close. We were diving in the Bikini Atoll on the wreck of the Nagato. And 3 of us went into into the regatta with lying turtle. We went inside, up a few levels, looked at this one room, and we didn't use a line, which was not a good thing. And then we came back out. When we got back out, the third diver was missing. So we decided to retrace our way back. But this was quite tricky because we were in different levels. But basically, we followed our silt trail as such. And eventually got to one room, and we were really glad to see that this diver was there. What saved him? The fact that he just sat put, waiting for us to come back. If he tried to find his way back, he would have been lost forever. But he was really glad to see us. We found him, and he followed us out. But that was really close. So here's an interesting aspect of diving, which I don't really know the answer. But my question is, should rebreather divers and open circuit divers dive together? And if so, is it a good idea and is it safe? So I'm not 100% sure that I'm sure it gets done all the time. But the question is, does the buddy system really apply? Is the buddy system still valid? That's the other question. The buddy system definitely is a proven system. People have been using it for years, and it has saved a lot of lives. But when you're doing technical diving, it's slightly different. So even if you're diving as a pair, are you really on your own? Or how much is expected of you? Especially like if you open circuit diver and your buddy is a rebreather diver, you probably don't really know totally how his system works. Never mind how you're going to help this diver. The reverse is probably less true, but can an open circuit diver buddy breathe off a rebreather diver? I'm not sure it can be done. I remember trying to buddy breathe with twin noses. It was quite a mission, and that's still a simple system. So, this is like an open question, really. But, I remember the day when they said, you're not allowed to cave dive with a twin nose. Not that I use them much, but it's like an older kind of rule that was established. Because the reason why is because it's very difficult to buddy breathe. So I'm not sure what the answer is, but I think somebody should kind of create a policy how to solve this issue, because I'm not entirely sure that anybody has discussed it. But I leave it as an open question. But for myself, as it stands, I think it would be simpler if rebreather divers buddy together and establish how they can save each other, and open circuit divers dive together, and the process there is more or less established. But if you are very, very deep, the buddy system isn't really going to work.